All right, we're starting just a couple minutes behind, but we're going to get things started. Thanks so much for coming. Last session before the plenary is always that spot you're hoping for in the conference. Some important housekeeping notes. Vicky is late. She thought our session starts at 3:45, so she's on her way, and I'm sure. Oh, here she comes. Big round of applause when she enters. Big round, big round. All right. So this really came out of a few discussions that we're having back in April in Cleveland at Museums on the Web, and talking about how museums can sometimes be considered special clients. How can we become better at prototyping? How can we become better as a client for experienced design companies or for contractors at various levels? And so I'm really pleased, if you want to go to the next slide, Troy, to be joined by Erica Dillon. If you want to introduce yourselves.
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'm Erica Dillon. I'm with Upswell. We're an experience design company based in Portland, Oregon, and I'm the executive producer and also the partner at Upswell.
Hi, I'm Troy Lechance. I'm executive creative director at Blue Cadet. We're an experience design firm in Philadelphia and New York.
And I'm Vicki Portway from Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, and I work in the digital experiences team. Led a lot of digital projects, and now I'm working on digitization.
And Scott Gillam, manager of digital platforms at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and I lead the digital storytelling team. And we have a little video to start things off.
How many have seen it?
Final toll.
Yes. Is there a problem, sir?
Yes. A quick question about the final toll.
Yes.
You see, yeah, we didn't budget for this.
Excuse me?
This was marked 1999.
Yeah.
Well, I've only got $7 set aside for this.
So what are we gonna do today?
Well, I'd like the highlights, but for now, I can only pay for a trim.
Okay, so today we're only gonna do the trim?
No, the highlights, but I can only pay for the trim.
I mean, how much of the taco stand was what?
About $12.
Yeah, right. About $12.
Sir, we're not the taco stand.
No, it was. I had beef, same thing as I had here.
You had the filet.
Yeah, cow.
Okay, let me make a phone call, see what I can do. Maybe I can get you $8.50. Can you do $8.50?
I'll pay for the highlights next time, but for now, I need you to just go ahead and throw them in.
So basically, you want me to work for free?
No, I don't want you to work for free. It's just a test. That way I can see if my husband likes it, and then you can roll the cost over until the next time I need color if he likes it.
I went through in line items some of the stuff that we would just remove.
I'm not making any money on this either. You gotta help me out.
We got a discount bin.
I know, I've checked the discount bin, but I want this one. We can do this. This is not a challenge. This is an opportunity.
We tried with three entrees.
Oh, yes. You ordered 3 entrees, sir.
We ordered, but it's order mean eating. Yeah, we want it.
What's your name?
Todd.
Todd. You gotta work with me.
That one's $19.99.
Mike, come on, let's do this. Let's do this.
Dude.
Well, I can cover your hard costs, but that's really as far as I'm willing to go.
I'll give you $8.50 today. I'll come back next Tuesday. We're gonna make it up on the next one. What do you say?
What?
Ah, excellent. We'll go ahead and we'll pay this time, but what we're gonna need you to do is show us how you made it, so we can do it on our own in-house from now on. You did? It's a great dinner.
There's no guilty parties here. So, that was Erica. So you can go to the next slide after that. Constant dating.
Edit each other's slides late at night.
Yeah. So thinking about constant dating, because I know everybody is, views that as a positive experience. Yeah. If you go to the next slide. So recently, when we think about the challenges and as they mentioned in the video, the opportunities we give firms that we work with. One of the things that has come out recently, we're a Canadian National Museum, and as such, we do operate at arm's length from the government. But recently, it was interesting to note that over the summer this year, the Treasury Board president came out with a statement saying, no more 200-page RFPs, instead bake-offs and competitions. No more blind marriages with big IT providers, instead constant dating. More show and less tell, more focus on working prototypes so that we really see what a company or provider can do, more competition, and more agile providers. The Government of Canada needs a new approach to buying goods and services. Our existing procurement system is robust and rigorous, but it's time to try something new. We need to be more nimble, more responsive, and more suited to today's fast-moving digital environment. In a word, we need to be agile. So, is this enough? Is it too little, too late? I mean, it's nice to see the government moving in a direction where they're considering digital procurement is an issue. So some of the topics that we'll be talking about today is sort of how can we ourselves, for those of you that are here that are within institutions, how can you think about procurement practices? And also with some of the prototyping scenarios that we'll describe, how can we begin to adapt and change so that we're not only getting a better product, but also being a better client in informing our practice. Next slide. So what ways can institutions build the collaboration skills and digital literacy to have optimal relationships with external creative partners? And so, I mean, that's really the key word. It's not vendor, it's partner. We're in this together. We're signing a contract and we're complicit. So next slide. So to start things off, I was going to talk about one of the things that we've come to do or to practice in the last 2.5 years at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. Now, we opened up 47,000 square feet of exhibit space back in 2014. It was a capital construction project. We were building the building at the same time we were building a collection, a long time as we were building processes. So it was really a waterfall method. It was really one big payoff at the end. So naturally, there is a lot of, I would say, friction that was created in the project schedule and the fact that we were prototyping and using product while it was being developed for the spaces it was actually being created for. So it really was like there's going to be this great payoff at the end and everything's going to go great. And we all know that in digital projects that doesn't necessarily work that well. So moving forward, once we opened, and of course there's remediation on exhibits as after we open, we're learning how visitors are actually responding, further to like actual testing that we did during exhibit fabrication. But what are the next steps? There's temporary exhibits, there's core artifact rotations, there's everything that we need to support as an ongoing operating institution. What we ended up doing, and this sort of builds off, there was a prototyping session this morning that Keir and Carnegie were leading this morning where they talked about internal lab processes. And I think that's really broken. I think internal lab processes don't work. You need partners, and you need stakeholders, and you need a democratic system. One of the things that we do is we have an annual creation lab. So partnering with a provincial body as well as the National Film Board, which I don't know if you're aware of the NFB in Canada, but they are certainly a leader in the Canadian space in terms of digital interactive storytelling, along with linear filmmakers. So by leveraging a provincial education fund, we have a creation lab that we hold that we bring in linear storytellers and we combine them with developers and designers and our own curatorial team to do a 3-day hackathon. So it's using real museum content. We end up coming up with prototypes. We learn a ton. And as well, linear filmmakers get an education on how to do non-linear storytelling to better practice their craft towards new and emerging markets. So it really is a win-win-win scenario. Next slide. So within the space, we bring in producers from the National Film Board. We use our own curators to also act as content providers. Our design and production teams also work to become producers or get embedded in teams. And what that really allows is an iterative approach where, yes, we're working with real content. Are we expecting these to go to market? No. So there's low cost in terms of we know that these are skunk work projects to a certain degree, but we learn an absolutely great deal and we build community. We get to work with vendors that we haven't worked with yet. They get to try out technologies that they've been dying to try out, but they haven't really had a concrete content to apply it to, so they get to try out their own ideas. We combine various elements from a universal design methodology, so whether it's text-to-speech or whether it's the incorporative sound, haptic feedback, beacons, VR, AR, and at the end of 3 days, we have provincial partners that come in and actually witness what's been shaped. So, you know, internal labs are great, but they can be the best kept secret of your organization. By doing a lab like this, it's temporary. Our prototyping methodology still applies within exhibit scopes, but this really gives us a space where we start to build a conversation around what we're building, and to have external providers come in and say, presenting this content doesn't work this way for us. Like, we won't get that on an internal feedback loop, because museums can be their own social media. You know, curatorial teams and exhibit design departments can feed themselves or end up progressing down a path where when you start to introduce those outside voices, you can really start to create those pinch points where you really find how your visitors are going to engage with your content. Next slide. So 2 things that ended up coming out of those creation labs from 2015, 2016, and we're about to hold one December 10th in Winnipeg, is the VR that we ended up producing for empowering women. So the VR project that we worked on in the creation lab was actually with a completely different subject matter, but we got to see how it would work, how our programming department would have to work with our volunteer and docent base to be able to work with visitors to actually onboard them with a brand new emerging technology, work through some of those processes that we could then carry through to visitor services, because part of us as technologists, we'll go chase something, and then what about deployment? What about marketing it? How are you going to expose it? How are you actually going to deliver on the promise that you're building for the public? There's a paper that exists on this one from last year's MW. On the next slide, we've got the augmented reality component that we did for freedom of expression in Latin America. And this was another one where we did end up engaging some of the software providers that we actually used in the creation lab. So this is where, too, working together with a common understanding or a shared understanding of expectation, where everybody wants to learn something and be able to experiment, but also having a clear delineation of priorities, really allows for building for success. And the other thing is what we all know from a contract standpoint, our approach at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights is to do deliverable-based contracts. That can be really problematic for successful proponents of the RFP, because if they can't deliver to those deliverables, they're on the hook for them if they allow, when negotiating that contract. So with emerging technology, that can be a really precipitous place to be in, where you can become a really bad client. Because if you can't define your deliverables effectively, then you're not going to get a lot of people answering your RFP, for one, because they'll know that it could cost $50,000, it could cost $250,000. And by holding these types of creation labs, it builds capacity within your staff to understand, what am I going to be able to create for X amount of dollars? Or if we're going to set a budget for this project, this kind of gives you a sense of scope. Oh, actually, we got this far with 3 people. Oh, well, we actually wanted to get way further. It's going to take a longer time. It's going to take more resources. It begins to build that knowledge within your teams to be able to then say, when you're evaluating those RFPs, to say, oh, okay, this vendor knows what they're talking about. This is someone that we want to work with in the future. Actually, you know what? We've completely scoped this project wrong, and we need to take it back and think about what our deliverables are. And with that, maybe we will go to our partners.
Make sure you can hear me. I can drive if you want me to. Big picture background, we've had an opportunity to work on a lot of large projects over the past 5 years, and I think that kind of puts the where the rubber meets the road oftentimes in terms of coordinating all these things. That has helped us internally at Upswell as a company, and in dialogue with a lot of the folks that we're working with, is develop this idea about prototyping as an attitude. It's a process, obviously, and you do lots of different kinds of things, but one of the things that can make it successful or make it useful in a for a partnership is thinking about how it's an actual an attitude. So for those of you who may have gone to some early presentations where prototyping was talked about in terms of certain kinds of practices or things that you can do, I'm not going to talk so specifically about that, but just talk about some of the ways that we came to this idea and some of the aspects of that attitude, and give you just a couple examples. So, I just did this kind of like working definition of rapid prototyping. I'm not going to read it. It's very academic. But one of the things that we're trying to do in rapid prototyping is start with the assumptions that we know we have and kind of flesh them out. And then figure out, what needs to be validated, what stands up, what's viable. It's basically one of the key things, though, is turning all of those questions into some kind of production plan. We start out with a production plan it's the same one that we've always had. We have some key milestones, and we know that we're trying to get to a particular end goal, and we've got some certain parameters that we're working with. But ultimately, we know things are going to change. We know that deliverables are going to change. We might still call them the same thing, wireframes, but it may not look. It could. Who knows what that's going to look like necessarily. And part of it is how do we create an environment where folks are open to that, understand that that's going to happen, and that when we're talking about delivering wireframes, that could look like a number of different things, but it's meant to do a certain kind of work, which is move the project forward and get us into producing the thing that everyone thinks is what we want to produce and install. So one of the key aspects of this sort of idea of prototyping as an attitude is this feeling that we've come to express as dwelling in ambiguity. And I think this can be really uncomfortable for a lot of folks and on both clients and our internal team. This is not how many of us in our industry were necessarily raised. We were, in my case in particular, I was as I learned sort of digital media production and experience design and working on projects, we were always meant to be very protective of our scope. Protect your scope at all costs. And because of that, we would skirt over things, this idea of dwelling in ambiguity. We don't know what the answers are, but we're supposed to look as if we do, and we're just supposed to say, here's what the solution is going to be. We're going to stick to it. I'm sticking to it, and you go down that path because you got to protect your scope at all costs. We find that there's a lot of play and joy if you can allow yourself, though, to be in this ambiguous place and use prototyping as a way to test all of these assumptions that you're coming to the table with. Part of the idea of doing this is opening up the creative possibilities for the team as a whole. Can we create an environment where everyone feels that they have a creative voice? Another kind of concept of this idea of prototyping being an attitude is the concept of the good enough. There's a good question in Joni Thompson's last session about when do you know if it's good enough? This is a prototype that we did. Sometimes it literally is the 20-second thing that you just need to get in front of someone so that we are all on the same page and speaking the same language in terms of having a concept. Like, I have this idea. Let me show you what I'm thinking. We don't need to necessarily design wireframes or spend a couple of days coming up with a formal presentation. Sometimes we just need to get some stuff out there. And the reason why this is a videotape is because oftentimes we're communicating with people who aren't in the same room with us as well. It's just a useful tool. So part of embracing this idea of the good enough is the lo-fi. It's off the cuff. It can be unplanned. It's generative and explorative. If that's the word, explorative. And so really we're trying to allow insights to happen, but we're also trying to allow our points of view to change. And that can be a very uncomfortable place for a lot of people. The other thing that is really important about the good enough is that in terms of rapid prototyping, one of the key word here is rapid, and that doesn't mean just do a whole bunch of work really fast, but get me the same thing that I want just in a shorter period of time. It means what's the minimum amount of time you can do to get some insights or to answer some questions that helps move the ball forward. So we found the best way of getting to the rapid piece is just actually time boxing activities. So you've got 2 days. What can you do in 2 days? And so we just kind of get the team together. We're all in. And we see what we can figure out in that 2-day period of time. What's the most important thing? And we start working on it. Another thing that we've come to do is think about the work that we're doing, particularly in a prototyping phase, is to not overcreate, I guess, in terms of documentation and or presentation, really. So it's the idea that there's no big reveal. So trying to be transparent, put things out there, and have everyone sort of involved all along the way, as opposed to us going behind closed doors, creating something that looks really good, investing, in such a way that we're disappointed when nobody likes it, right? It helps us basically, it lets us be free of having critiques that sting, I suppose. When you put something out there, if you've invest a lot of time into it, you want to get it right. And so here we're trying to be like, we don't care if it's right, we care that everyone's looking at it, more or less. And then another thing that we're also trying to move towards more of is workshopping ideas and doing generative design, and bringing sort of everyone together to have everyone own the outcomes, really, and so that there's this sense of not only being on the same page, but really ownership about the design direction that we're going down. These are best done in person, and that can be a challenge we can talk more about later. One of the things that's useful for us is to also understand what's going on in the background from an organizational perspective. Sometimes we don't even know that there's conversations happening that are actually influencing the project without us knowing that they're influencing the project. Stakeholders that are waiting in the wings to swoop in and to upset the apple cart, or who want to see certain kinds of things coming out of the work that you're doing, and this isn't necessarily a way of working that they're going to be excited about, because it's quite messy. And the most important thing, though, with this idea about prototyping as an attitude is really understanding that the team is a partnership. We're all in it together, and that therefore we all own sort of the outcome of it together. There are some specific things that certainly, from a firm's perspective, when we're on the hook to deliver sort of an integrated and installed product experience at the end, there is A/B testing in particular could be a make it or break it situation. So there are times when some of the early stuff that we need to do is really, well, how does this hardware like fit together? And that's something that we kind of need to be aware of, because one of the times that we often forget that sometimes we actually need money to buy the hardware that we will eventually go into the exhibit as well. But one of the other things that we found that is really useful is getting to this notion of the minimal viable content. So when we come to a project, there's exhibit teams and curators who have done a ton of research or at least know what the landscape of work is that they're dealing with, but they haven't really kind of started putting it to the test. And so it's been really, been helpful to start thinking about taking the bare bones of the content. So we have an outline, or we just have some, references, some ideas, and we put it to the test, and we start to say, okay, what's the minimum viable kind of content for this experience that we've already started having some assumptions about in terms of how we're going to make it move it forward. One thing I think that too we've for firms like probably Blue Cadet and Upswell as well, and I'm sure there's lots of other firms like this, we love content. We want to work on content. We oftentimes, I think there's a sense of defensiveness about the content and who owns it, and what it means, and there's an interpretive point of view, and we as firms want to be very sensitive to that, but at the same time, we also want to be able to jump into it as well and not feel like it's feel like there's security in this shared environment where we can kind of let the interpretive team sort of let go of the reins and see what we can kind of do with some of their content ideas in this sort of pressure testy sort of way. Document. Again, as part of sort of like the no big reveal, kind of idea around some of this early prototyping, we're still doing a lot of documenting. It's just ugly documenting. It's messy. It's, we're literally taking videos and we just kind of throw a bunch of stuff out there so that we can then talk about it and see what people's responses are. And also, showing you debug modes and things like this. So this is an example here of just, like what happens if you've got triangles or squares, looks like. Moving around on this canvas is a kind of visual direction. Do your time. One of the things that the museum team has a responsibility for in this sort of prototyping environment is being able to spend time working on the project outside of reviewing deliverables. And I think that's what's the really big challenge, because folks are super busy. Oftentimes we're in distributed teams and we're not close to each other. And so trying to find out when is the best time to do it. And the prototyping stage or phase can be really useful because it's a part of the way that we can build the team relationship if the team relationship doesn't exist, and try and find ways to do it through this sort of prototyping activities. We've also found that because experience design, if we think about it from this prototyping attitude, even over the course of the project, if we understand that it's developing incrementally and iteratively, folks can jump in at different times, and it's not going to necessarily upset the flow of what's going on, unless that is a person who's a decision maker who decides that they don't like what they're seeing necessarily, but you've never met them before. That's always fun. So what are a couple of things that we've learned over the past several years as we've had opportunities to develop relationships with partners in museum team partners and start to understand about this idea of what is the attitude that we need to bring to these kind of prototyping activities and to the project as a whole, really, so that we can find that space of joy and creativity and collaboration. Really, one of the things that's important is that prototyping in this kind of way allows us to remove our egos from the work. We don't want to be tied to these ideas or attached to them. We want to have better ones. So if we can work in an environment where we can let our egos go somewhat, and we're not being protective of scope or protective of certain ideas because it's tied to your payment at the end of the month or whatever it is, we can have the opportunity to hopefully find even better ways of getting to the experience that we're looking for to deliver to the audiences that we're interested in delivering them to. Workshops and charrettes always lead to better project outcomes than presentations and approvals. And that's just a fact. That doesn't mean that you don't have presentations and approvals. It just means that if you're looking for certain kinds of a way to elevate the experience from a larger team perspective, charrettes and workshops are really invaluable to do that. You also don't have to do everything at once. We really like to start with time-boxed, simple prototyping, knowing that we're going to get to the more complex stuff. But it's just like, what do you need to prototype? Let's start with that, bite off a chunk, and then time box it. You got 2 days, you got 3 days, and then see how do we move the ball forward. Not being able to be face-to-face shouldn't be a problem given today's video technologies, so we should be able to communicate with each other. We got to find the right tools, though, and sometimes that takes a call to the IT department. And then we've also found, though, that not every team or project can be in this space of prototyping or have this sense of prototyping as a place to be open and creative and experimental and not have certain set deliverables. partially because there's this challenge of this challenge of psychological security. There many teams just don't feel they haven't had the experience. They haven't been able to participate in this way. And this is certainly, I'm speaking from my team's perspective as well. This is not necessarily the museum team that I'm talking about, although I'm sure that's probably it's something that museum teams experience as well. But many people just sometimes don't feel comfortable dwelling in ambiguity. But because we're optimists, we know that the relationship can grow, and it can happen through these very activities. That if we find an opening, and I think that's kind of the things, is like, where do we find the opening where we can start having these kinds of productive, creative opportunities. And then finally, really, prototyping is an attitude that defines a creative partnership. And it's going to change, really. We know that the ideas, the outcomes, the experience is going to change, and it can be uncomfortable for a lot of people. But understanding how this prototyping could be an attitude, a kind of disposition that we have to the work that we do, the work that we present, and the way that we co-create with other people, that can really be sort of a key to sort of the successful engagement of our visitors in these complex environments that we're working with. And how people end up experience all of that love and labor that we put into those projects over time.
Thanks, Erica. So I'd love to just to build on a lot of what Erica was saying there. Not on? Okay,
have to, like,
I have
stick
to
your
be
face right
really
up in
close to it. Okay. So this is a common process that we see. When we get an RFP, this is frequently where we're brought in. The exhibition design is 100% complete, and we get a list of media ideas, and we're expected to execute. And we're happy to execute on those, but frequently that's the scenario is we have this creation zone, and we want it to be fun and interactive, and you have a 32-inch touchscreen to do that on. Yeah. So I think even for the most specialized firms who want to just do implementation, that can be problematic. You know, there's no space for collaboration with the exhibition designer. There's no space for the media partner to bring in their frame of reference, to start prototyping a little bit, to test some ideas. There's no space for what we call pre-implementation prototyping. So we're pulling in, different mediums. If we want something fun, there's a wide range of mediums that we can explore that are tactile, that are cross physio-digital, anything. So many things that might better manifest a fun experience. And if the space allows, we can test that. We can actually see if something's fun before we design the space that sits in. If the ask is we want something innovative, that's sometimes the ask that we get. It helps to be able to explore a range of ideas that might be innovative before, again, we're stuck in a particular canvas. In this case, this is an AI project that we're exploring for one of our clients, and that could easily be in a touchscreen, but seeing these kind of collection connections might actually be better served in a larger canvas. Another ask is, if we're doing a large touchscreen, can it, serve multiple users? We need a space to kind of prototype that experience. This is just a quick motion study that we do. Key to that is making room for failure. And I mean, this is a bit of a provocation, of course. We don't want to install anything that's going to fail. you know, it's what we finally install is going to be foolproof, of course. But is there space in the process for those first ideas to fail and for you to arrive at a better idea? You know, this is a project that we did for Air and Space Museum, and the one on the left is based on a design comp and a quick motion study. So these are fairly standard deliverables that you might see in a traditional RFP. The problem we were running into is that we didn't feel good about it. You know, it wasn't intuitive. It wasn't really inviting exploration. It was a little stiff. So what we really wanted to do was step back and try a different way of exploring this interface. So we start, you know, it helped actually in this case that we had the space to start, you know, prototyping an interface in code. And then we could arrive at something that actually felt intuitive, exploratory, and visualize connections and their collection in a way that was fun and interesting. So looking back at process, this is more of a question, you know, this is our ideal process where we're invited to be part of the exhibition process and collaborate closely to bring ideas, to start prototyping early, to leave room for failure, and then find a better solution. And then at the end, after install, you know, maybe even have time to measure and innovate and iterate on what we produced. This is almost never the case. And then this is kind of a last end note. You know, our project teams want to feel good about the work they're doing. And a lot of that is just, one, you know, being able to talk about the work. And I don't mean just after it launches, but it could be any part of the process. Maybe you've found an innovative way to solve a problem, and you know, it's great if you can share that. And it can be beneficial for, obviously, for the agency, but also for the client in many cases. But even more than that, you know, it's important for us to be able to recognize, you know, the things that were good, to be able to take those measurements and apply them to future projects. And if we can't kind of buy into what we're launching, if we can't measure that, and if we can't iterate on that and then recognize what works, then within our team, we're developing this kind of mindset of, you know, we don't really have to own what we're delivering. We just have to get it out there, ship it, not go over budget, and make sure the client's happy when we ship it and it's on time. But you know, if it doesn't work, then, you know, that's not our problem. So we definitely don't want to encourage that mindset in our office. And I think, you know, encouraging, inviting the agency that you're working with to partner with you on not just building it, but measuring it and helping you iterate it, because they want to help you with that.
Is that the Google or the PowerPoint?
This is the Google.
Awesome. Okay. Making sure I knew which slides were saying. Sure, I can drive if you want me to drive. Sure. Right on. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left. So I would like to invite everybody to feel free to jump in at any moment, because I'm really going to be kind of tying this up in a bow a little bit and talking more about all of us, not just museums, even though I'm from a very large institution that has a lot of tradition. And I think that's why I was invited to be here, because it seems like I've seen it all. But worked on a lot of projects and asked a lot of questions of people, you know, contractors and museums. You know, what are the challenges that we face, and how can we all get on the same page, particularly in terms of procurement processes, because those can sometimes be the most frustrating, and folks are always just wishing for a better way. And but also, I think just kind of how we work together, and like you were saying, prototyping is an attitude more than a process, and so getting to the good processes sometimes requires us to look at how we view things and our perspective. So everything, in talking to everyone, these are the three that bubble to the top: communication, trust, and expectations. Those tend to be the areas where folks are saying, we can improve, we could do better here. I think particularly communication and expectations. Everybody wants, absolutely has perfect trust through the entire thing, right? So, but I think just recognizing that you're coming at it from two very different perspectives sometimes, but also that's part of the benefit. That's why you're bringing in contractors to work with you, or I'm sorry, I couldn't say agencies. We decided we were going to use the word agencies, but being a government agency kind of person, it's really hard for me. So I'm going to say contractor. I apologize.
You can say vendor, it's okay.
Yeah.
Vendors, okay. Vendor. I know, right? A little bit of cringing. So I have a question for the crowd. How many in the room are contractors, vendors, agencies, whatever you like to call yourself? Wow. Ooh. And the rest are cultural organizations, I assume? How about somebody who just wandered in off the street? Okay, good. All right. Oh, Ryan. All right, thanks. Thanks for coming. So, stepping back and identifying your shared values and vision and how you define success. This is one that I find a lot of folks, I know we're guilty of it, that we just don't always talk about what does success look like. And I'm not talking about just deliverables, like, oh yeah, if we have 5 screens and they're all working, we're good. It's more like, what does the board expect of this? What does the director expect to see? Ryan?
Well, Vicki, if we set success criteria up front, then every project we do can't be a success.
Good point. So I'm just going to throw out a couple of things that have bubbled up in my conversations with people, and just some observations. This is by no means exhaustive, or even saying this is everything, but just to see what your responses are. So empathy is something that's come up in a lot of different discussions here at MCN and everywhere else, and we talk about it a lot with our users, or / audience / visitors / guests, whatever you want to call them. So using that same mentality about empathy with how we work together can make for much better relationships. And so it's understanding that, particularly on the museum side, you probably have teams that have a wide array of experiences and skill sets. So you might, as a contractor, be in a room talking about how we're going to go through this great design thinking process, and all the digital people from the museum are like, yeah, okay, great. And then you've got the curator kind of glazing over, or people who don't quite understand what's happening, because that's just not a process that they're familiar with. So it's just kind of stepping back and knowing your audience and helping them through things, knowing where they're coming from. It's also in the procurement process, knowing we're trying to make the best thing out of sometimes some very tough rules, and figuring out how we can improve on that, and then bring us forward as organizations in how we do procurement. Anything else about empathy anybody wants to throw in?
I think it's valuable. You made a really good point about different people, even internally, having different points of view, different experiences. I think it helps the outside, let's say the outside development partner,
Mhm.
to understand what your internal challenges and constraints are.
Exactly.
So if that could be strictly internal in terms of different stakeholders within. It could be internal in the sense that this is what you're facing in terms of your audience or your marketing or whatever
Mhm.
it might be. But knowing it helps to build empathy for those of us who are providing service, to know what you're up against.
To know what you're up against. Yeah, absolutely. What are your limitations? What are your barriers? What, are you grappling with? And a lot of people are going through transformations of some kind. So knowing that up front is very helpful. And yeah, I'm sorry. We have another hand. Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's a really good point. She mentioned stakeholder interviews, just for the recording. I agree. You want to be as objective as possible and bring in everybody's perspectives. At the same time, not everyone in the organization may be on board with what you were hired to do, right? Like, you may be hired to bring in new ideas and bring us forward. I personally think every engagement with a contractor should be our opportunity to grow and learn, right? That should be intentional in every contract that we write. It's not just about paying for a service and getting a product, obviously we are, but also bringing in things that will help us up our skills or change the way we do things. And so not everyone that you interact with on the stakeholder interview may have that perspective, and so you always have to keep in mind, what are we really driving for here? Yeah, that's important, because we are gonna have to help them with the change, but it shouldn't drive the product, right, necessarily. So that is true. That's a difficult one. I have the why question. I love the why question. Even better, I love why not, which I have to use sometimes with the contracting office. Why not? Why can't we do that? The why question, constantly asking it and then constantly being prepared to answer it, can help a lot of people to understand why you're doing a process a certain way, or introduce them to something new, and also build empathy. I also think watch your language. Doesn't mean don't be vulgar. Actually, it does. But again, using tech terminology with certain folks in the museum can confuse or and sometimes frighten people. Like, I typically don't use the word failure a lot when I'm talking to curators or conservators, because failure for a conservator means the collection is damaged in some way or not properly preserved. So there are some terms that you want to introduce people to in a way that they understand it, or using the terminology that they understand. There's also processes that have the same names sometimes that mean very different things to different people. So there's a lot of language barrier sometimes that you need to keep in mind as you're trying to work with folks. So anything else on language that folks want to throw out?
Goes the other way too.
Yes.
I mean, how many times do we bring in a partner and we throw a bunch of museum acronyms at them that have no idea what we're talking about?
Oh yeah, and being clients or being contractors, sorry, whatever term is appropriate. Struggle with this. Contractor, okay.
Watch your language.
Yeah. You just want to make the client happy, right? So there's a lot of cases where questions might not be asked or things might not be challenged because you just want to make them happy. And that's great, but I personally, and a lot of the projects I work on, we bring in the contractors to push us in new directions and challenge us. So that's an area where probably both sides, but in my thinking, you guys could be like way more assertive than you actually are sometimes. Getting to know you. So I was just going to throw out an example of something we do at the proposal stage that I think has been effective, and we worked with Blue Cadet, and I think you guys kind of liked it, but I hope so. He's just saying that because he wants me to be happy. We'll find out.
Q&A session.
Yeah. So when you go through the proposal stage, you get the request for proposals, and then you read the 200 pages, and then you have to spend hours and hours and hours on crafting a proposal, and that's a lot of work for contractors, right? You're spending like 40 hours sometimes to just put together a proposal, and then you have no idea if you're going to get it, right? And then sometimes there's a Q&A phase. At least we have one, and typically it's written back and forth. That is very time-consuming on both sides, and you don't always get enough information about who are the people we're working with, what's the culture of the organization, where is their thinking, how did this even come to be? There's a lot of unanswered questions. And so we started having pre-proposal gatherings, if you will, with vendors who were interested in bidding on a project. And that gave us an opportunity to actually see each other face to face, get to know the team dynamics. They could see us and who the people were behind the curtain, and actually come and visit our environment if it happened to be a project that involved, a lot of physical things. And then we get to know the vendors, contractors, what their thinking is like, who they are. And it's just a much better way of getting to know each other. We share what our expectations are for the proposals, so when you're crafting your proposal, you have an opportunity to talk about that. So I feel like, at least on my side, I feel like it's helped get us a better pre-production process.
Do you do that as an open house with all the different firms coming together and just a big open discussion with all the potential competitors?
With the potential bidders, so it's after they've expressed an interest. Part of the process is you basically say, yes, I'm interested in bidding on this.
I think there were about
so when it-
12 in the milestones
Yeah, there were
pre-bid
12.
meeting.
Yeah.
At least.
What's that like from your point of view?
From a contractor side?
With all your competition there, and you're trying to get to know.
It was educational. You know, we knew who we were bidding against.
Sizing up the competition. No, but seriously, we have rules. We got rules. If a contractor asks us a question, we have to answer it and share the question with all the perspective, right? So there's really no secrets. But go ahead.
Is this billed hours at this point?
Ah,
Is this free?
good question. We do not pay
Free.
anybody yet, but it's.
I know we want the process to go earlier and earlier, and I loved your slide, Troy.
Mhm.
But that really starts to rack up on the cost end.
It does. It does.
How do we even budget something like that out if we don't know what the project is yet? That's really tricky.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. 40 hours of crafting proposal time. It's a weighing of like you don't have to come in person. You could do the phone call, right? So, get on the phone for an hour or 2 hours. No, yeah, no, it's not free. It's not free at all. Go ahead.
No, that's a really good question. 'Cause,
Yeah.
For every project we've done, we really want the right firm. We want, and our last RFP process was a lengthy RFP, but we share everything. We had a Q&A. We had, I think, 2 Q&As. We encouraged people to come visit, and one team did come to visit, and they didn't get to the next round. And I said, I think you were at an expansion, and we didn't encourage. And then they said, well, can we come visit and resubmit? And I felt like we already have so many good people. But actually, I found us in a position of people that all answered the proposals. They were all sort of had good ideas, but no one was like showing us something different.
Mm-hmm.
We did not. Part of this program is not to do what we've done at other museums, and so we had to actually go back and ask them to do a fast, like innovative, like just show us some great. Now that we know all this, show us some like creative ideas. And you would say, well, that's like sharing ideas that But as your says, we can't go build it anyway. We want the right team, and I was really scared to tell people we were not going to ask them to do that. And every person who submitted it, I don't know if they were lying, tell us, but they said that was a really fun process because we told them to just like show us really how creative and how you're really going to think about this, and really just show us your creativity because the rest was about really understanding the project.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a lot of time, and I felt for anyone who didn't get it. But I mean that's part of the business is that's you build that into I feel like your cost structure.
That's a really tricky scenario to be in because you can end up, coming from a design background, that's spec work. So you can get yourself into hot water really quickly by just saying, give us something innovative, right?
Yeah.
Part.
A little more direction.
Yeah, no, but it's a hard balancing act, and I think that's really the conversation is how, if you get too far into the process before you contract someone, I've written a sentence and now I'm hiring Blue Cadet to be a spell check. Well, interpretation is a two-way street, so if I bring them in too late in the game, we're not getting the value that we're expecting to get, right? So how do we make a process but time is money. So, if it's a year-long project and they're coming in early, we have to respect the fact that it's going to cost more, or we need to find a way to say, you know what, we're going to do a rapid prototyping session that's paid, understand that 10-15% of the budget is actually going to skunk works that's going to disprove our theory, because essentially your first, the successful proponent to an RFP is the first witness to your insanity. To say how crazy your project is.
Yeah.
And then you have to be in a position where you're actually willing to listen to say, oh, well, maybe we have to disprove some of what we're thinking before we start building this out. Because if you really are just hiring people to execute, you're not going to get a lot of successful projects.
Yeah, and just to clarify this proposal stage meeting that we're talking about, we're not asking the contractors to share any ideas. We're just clarifying what's in the request for proposal so they can craft a proposal better.
We want them to show us how you're thinking. It wasn't like, okay,
Right.
now we have this and then we can go build it.
Right.
That.
Right.
And truthfully, it was really hard for most proposals to get
So then the challenge there is on your next round of RFPs, how do you better describe what you expect so that you're actually getting it the first round rather than having to go back to the vendors? Like, and I think that's part of the conversation. Like, yeah.
So I'm just saying.
Yeah.
everybody-
No, I think that-
people were called and told they couldn't do the second round, and they said, can we know we're behind? Can we still do that round?
Right. So we have
I'm
another.
not saying we didn't lose. I mean, I wouldn't want to be on the other side. I'm just saying, but
Neither would we.
That's where the empathy comes in. I wouldn't want to be on the other side. No, I'm not. I'm just teasing.
and then a lot said when they didn't get it, they said it was a really fun process for their team to actually have gone through. That's the feedback.
Yeah, we were on that. We were on that, and yeah, it's we had this. It was a fun project it was a fun process for our team to go through that. And I would say also though that kind of process is a little dependent on the size of the project and the potential visibility of it. And you know we can't extend that effort on every RFP, obviously. We've also been on processes like that where that little bit of awards exploration is paid. It's not enough to cover our hours, but it's a nice gesture and goodwill, and it does encourage us to kind of to put a little more thought into it.
I'm gonna
for
have to do
sure.
that now.
And I actually did write that into next RFPs that we should have, because I felt bad that even though everyone did it,
Yeah.
I actually agreed that there's a little stipend for doing that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there
it-
should
it
be
hel-
some
it
upfront.
helps, for
Yeah.
sure.
Sorry, there's a hand behind you. She's been waiting ever so patiently.
Just to say, so we do a lot of work at scoping out RFPs with clients and kind of coaching them through that process and trying to get them. One of the big things that we talk about is expressing outcomes, not outputs.
Right.
And setting a set of money against the outcome that you're looking for. But what I recognise is the challenge of building up that partnership and trust at that point when you're in the RFP.
Mm-hmm.
That's where people can get really, things start to get pinned down because actually they're grasping onto something that's concrete. But the idea, I've also been a vendor contractor agency on the other side where somebody said to us, we want to increase engagement, we want to increase usage of a particular product, just go away and do it. And we were able to deliver on our skills, as in we were able to deliver that through our skills.
Mm-hmm.
And they were able to see the results of that. I think there's that kind of side of things of just kind of saying, we're gonna hold on to the outcomes. You're gonna have to make sure you deliver them. I think we probably put more hours into the product and the service because we felt responsibility for delivering the outcome, not the actual product
Mm-hmm.
side of things. But I have to say there was a great sense of achievement when we did it.
Right. So actually, that's a good segue to this one. How many people have been here? So, I'm sorry. I went too far. There we go.
Oh.
That's what I was going for. Yeah, we've been deliverables.
I've done that.
Sorry. No, this one. This is one I hear a lot. And yeah, so often there's a mismatch between how the procurement process works and even the budgeting cycle process works within organizations with how would be the ideal process working with contractors. And so I can't say that I found the perfect solution yet, but a lot of folks phase their projects, have upfront ideation, paid ideation sessions, to define the deliverables, to define the outcomes that you want. And so that can be worked in, and I think should be, but I would love to hear what folks feel or think about how to solve this particular problem.
I've been on the inside as well as on the outside, so I totally understand the need, the desire to get whatever you can get for as little money as you can spend on it.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes a huge difference for those who are trying to come up with as creative an idea as possible for whatever the challenge is.
Mm-hmm.
To not know what the budget, even a
How many people don't share their budget range during the proposal process? Okay. I do, but I know that some organizations don't, so.
It happens a lot, and it's really putting all of the people who respond to an RFP in a bad position, because, I mean, there are plenty of times where not plenty, there are too many times, where the budget does not fit the scope, and you look at an RFP and say, you know, they want like a $750,000 worth of project, but I think that they actually are only thinking of spending 250. So what do we propose? 250's worth? It ain't gonna satisfy. 750's worth? They're not gonna give us the job.
But what are you gonna do when you get the job because you knew it was 250 and I mean, to me, a blind mouth is you get all the things and you see what you're gonna say you do, and that my feeling is that a good team knows if it's $750,000, it's gonna say it. It's gonna be very well clear, and then you're gonna say like they fit the scope, and then you're gonna say, but we only have 250, in which you should go back and say, what in this scope could be phase 1 and 250, or what could you do because this is outside our range, and you say not really anything, or we could do this. But to me, to tell you this and have everyone fit into it, they usually don't deliver what you want either.
I think, go ahead.
The video of budgeting in real life.
Yeah.
If you go to buy a house or a car or get a new kitchen, the first question is always, what's your budget?
To your
You never go to a
intermediary.
real estate agent and say, can I have a house please, what's your budget? I'm not telling you. And then you walk around a whole load of houses and say,
No,
this is
no.
what you do.
Who's our real estate agent in this deal?
Yeah,
Right? So
Right.
I was stunned when I came into this sector, and people revealed their funding to the vendors
Yeah.
before negotiations started.
Yeah.
Guess how much that project was bid at?
Right at the top.
I mean,
Right.
it's really bad business practice to reveal how much you have. But I understand the point you're saying.
But again,
it's almost abusive to say,
Yeah.
I want $1 million project for $20,000. What?
Right, only if you treat every negotiation as an adversarial.
I don't treat any negotiation.
But what's the harm, right? I mean, you're actually, if it's get in the game on both sides, do it on both sides.
Yeah. I mean, that's
the implication there.
that's the
Right,
same.
You've got to trust, you've got to build that.
Right, you're looking at converging data points and trying to find the point where you can meet in the middle, right? So it may not be that you give I only have 750K. You can say, hey, I have high six figures, or I have somewhere in the relationship of $500,000 to $800,000, depending on the level of scope and the different ways that you can approach that. And then you get a real sense of dialogue in that, right? If you just come to me and say, like, I've got a magic number, I'm not going to tell you, but I want all of this, it's a pointless discussion, Douglas. You know this.
And we won't pay for anything.
I'm just gonna tell
Bruce
everyone,
is a friend
my
of mine.
very first day at my job, on the very, very first seller on project with another firm, the bid was X, and then I said, what's the budget? And the budget was exactly X, but the team that obviously told them that forgot that there's back-end development, there's a hardware integrator, and I said, did you guys tell them the price? And they said, yes, they asked, and I get you're saying a range, but I do when we're doing bids.
So you can
There's a
protect
sense
yourself.
of, here's the thing, there's a sense of the range when you talk about the project and you have a one-on-one, and you have all the questions, that question comes out. There's no like, no, it's a secret. But the thing is, if you're a good firm, you're gonna be able to say, we're gonna do this, and it really does take, the worst is when you get a firm that fits it into your amount, but the truth is, they know it takes more than to do that, so it's better to say, we really can't, we're just gonna be too expensive.
But it is the
We also want to have good clients.
that's putting all the onus on the firm, though. I think the thing is, like Douglas, to your point, I completely disagree. You have to share your budget, because if you're if you or a ballpark, like similar to what Bruce said, but if I want
I should lose my job for doing that.
really, but that means, like, if I post a budget on a project, then I have an idea of what that project is worth, and that's the first step of trust. I want 12 bananas, and I got a budget of $5. Who can sell them to me?
I do think we
Somebody
need to.
can say, hey, you know what? I can do it for 5, or it's that beginning of the
It'll
relationship.
Never be under 5, ever.
Well, with competition, I think,
Here's how we do it.
oh, go ahead.
Ooh.
Yes, go ahead.
We load all those back in, and extra costs are, we keep those to ourselves. We also have a contingency, which we keep to ourselves. So we know how much it can grow to for scope changes that once we get together, we mutually agree to. So all that stuff's taken care of. We also know, is this the kind of project where we've only got so much for this element and that's it?
Mm-hmm.
Are we allowed to mutate, oh, we'll steal a little more from that over here when this idea gets better and we can. So we know the difference between something that's really hard and fast, and if that's the amount we're willing to spend on that element, we'll spend that. We're not seeking the lowest bidder.
Exactly.
That's called a request for quote.
Right.
But we do, when we make that distinction, we ask, okay, we're gonna give out as well as our budget, we're gonna give out the point award system on all the elements of the proposal, one of which is a score for your bid. So you can come in bidding exactly to budget, or we also say, what other kind of value can you add to this? And if they wanna come in and undercut everybody else by 10 grand or something because they feel they, for whatever the reasons are, they wanna do it, then that'll get a price evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's only 10% out of 100 points, that'll actually tell you something about how important cost is to the client. Have you found that generally?
That's
Because
similar to our
we get to decide how important cost is.
We also,
Yeah.
we have the team that rates the proposals. I take away the bids on every single budget. I want people to read the proposal and give feedback just on the proposal.
We do that, yeah.
And that's all we do. And then if the highest, and then if everybody really likes Team A and they are by far double what everything is, we already are still really looking at it because we go back and we've always had a good, we've always had then good, because the first one wasn't good when I started because that was crazy. After that, there was okay, here's the deal. This is how much we have for our budget. This is what we can do. If you can do it in this, you're back in the range, and there's a conversation. But to get to that first part, you can't tell people because people are gonna bid not 900, not 600, but right in the middle and and then they're gonna negotiate what you're gonna get.
Mhm.
I'm just saying, I know it's a frustrating thing, but also at this level, you know about what it's gonna cost to take it. And I know because we had 6 people bid and they were all about in the same range.
Yeah. We do have to get better at knowing, how to estimate and
It depends how good your proposal is.
that's true. That is true. And also hopefully, after starting the project, you're going to descope, you're going to have a lot of different changes happen. So, you're getting a starting point right there. But what you were talking about is where I wanted to get was, have some in reserve, have some, backup plans for changes that are going to happen down the road.
I was just going to say, I don't want to labour the point too much, but so I work at COGAP. We don't go for any pitches where we don't get given a budget.
Yeah.
And I would encourage everyone
I'm finding that more and more.
same thing.
That is what convinced me, along with the procurement process at Smithsonian, where the contracting office gets the budgets along with the proposals. We never see the budgets, we see the proposals. Once we've made a selection, then we see the budgets and we find out, oh, it's twice what we can afford. And so there's a lot of time and effort lost in that process. I've literally had an RFP that went out, this was probably 2004, that got proposals that ranged from $300,000 to $1.3 million on the same RFP. And it was the caliber of firms, that we were getting proposals from. The 1.3 was a Hollywood firm, So, but, obviously there's different opinions on this one, so.
And that's part of the reason why we run the Creation Lab is for that digital literacy, but still, to your point, Douglas, about budget, like, again, how much is a website is like how long is a piece of string? So if I want a VR project or an AR project, like we've put out bids and we've gotten from $1 million to 250.
What I'm talking about is not, I'm talking about more exactly what you were saying.
Yeah.
That's the approach I'm gonna take.
Keeping
Yeah.
And I
reserve.
have no problem communicating ranges.
Yeah.
I have a problem communicating, I got a fund, here's how much money's in the fund, can you do a project for me?
No, it's no. It's range. It's range, but it has to be a usable range, right? It can't.
We don't want to
Yeah.
know how much is in your fund. That's bullshit. We want to know how much is available for the project
responsible, and you should lose your job for that. That's right.
We should all be fired.
We should all be fired.
You know what you said about trust earlier? Trust has to start when you give out the RFP.
Right.
Trust doesn't start when you hire somebody.
Mm-mm.
Okay? You don't start to trust them once you sign a contract.
Right.
No, it's not about trust. It's not a trust thing. It's about, here's a big thing. Everybody knows who's worked for the vendor, there's always gonna be something additional or something else that's not, that you're gonna have to do a change order and an add-on or a phase two. And if a firm does not know how to, no, you have to know how to be able to, assess what it's gonna cost to do stuff, because there have been other smaller projects, when a team can't assess it, it ends up costing 3 times as much because they didn't realize, oh, I didn't realize your back end, like, they undercut.
Yeah, that's on us.
That's on the museum.
That's on us.
When everybody has all the right information, you can tell someone who knows how to bid it and knows what's gonna cost. You know what theirs should come in about. And when all this stuff comes in the same region, you know it's a good RP. When you have stuff all over the place, you know no one knows what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, it's
These guys were talking about the idea of figuring stuff out as you go.
right.
You're talking
Well,
about
there's a difference between a scope of work and hiring someone for a bid for a project.
Yeah.
Scope of work is when you get down to exactly what's gonna cost and what you're gonna bill it for. But when you're doing a proposal, there's 2 parts. The proposal and the scope of work are not done together. There you give what you want to do, but you then say, because when we say we wanna do this, and then they say, well, yeah, this is what we were thinking to keep that done, you're like, you know what, that's a better idea. How are we gonna do this? Your scope of work is totally gonna be different when you start the project after you do the kickoff.
So I will say that we are getting, and I'm talking, yeah, I'm talking Smithsonian, not just Air and Space or anything, but we are tending to get fewer and fewer proposals on things. And so it's the procurement process. It really is not conducive to how contractors work nowadays. And so we really have to re-examine how we work together. And it has to be a conversation between everyone. And so this is perfect. I mean, this is exactly what we want to start. And so, you know, one of the things we talked about doing was continuing this conversation in a way that's going to be productive and helpful to the community. So, you know, what can we produce? What next step can we take to make this easier and a better process for everyone? Is it creating some leaner templates on how we do proposals or how we do RFPs, or, you know, I'm just throwing stuff out there, I know. But
The reality is, however weak the RFP, keynote is coming.
Keynote.
Keynote's now. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks
guys.
for the conversation. It was great.